Talking opening round of the NBA playoffs. Ninja here with John Henson, with Christopher Walder. Guys, I love this Knicks Pistons series. Knicks, massive faves to win this at minus 430. The Pistons coming back at plus 340. Knicks minus 2.5 in spread markets, plus 118 there, with the Pistons minus 144 at plus 2.5. Total games as well, tabbed at 5.5. The over is minus 122 in those markets. Definitely lots to bet on, and keep it locked here because we'll have some picks at the bottom of this video. But guys, the Pistons won this season series 3-1, including a win at the Garden. Cade Cunningham was a beast against this Knicks team, 31 points, 8 assists per game against the Knicks, including 2 games of 36 points and a 29, 15, and 10 triple-double. Chris, break down this series a little bit here for me. How do you see this thing playing out? Is this going to be, a Brunson and Cat 2-man game against a young, inexperienced team, or will there be much more to this series on the floor?
Yeah, well, purely from experience, you obviously have to give the nod to the Knicks here. They're more battle-tested than the Detroit Pistons, clearly. New York was the darling of last year's postseason. I was certainly rooting for them in that series against the Philadelphia 76ers. And they obviously have the added superstar potential of Karl Anthony Towns. He advanced to the Western Conference Finals last year with the Minnesota Timberwolves. But what they need to be worried about most in this series is not just the fact that they're 1-3 against the Detroit Pistons this season. It's the fact that Detroit's playing with house money. Detroit has everything to gain and nothing to lose. The New York Knicks, when they assembled this new look roster with OG Anunoby, with Mikal Bridges, that team was designed to push the likes of the Boston Celtics to compete for an NBA championship. Yours truly was even projecting that the Knicks were going to win the entire thing as one of our bold predictions here at OddsShark. But going into this series in this best of 7 with Detroit's coming off 2 years in which they finished with fewer victories than they achieved all of this season. They've been one of the most pleasant stories in all of basketball. Cade Cunningham is looking like a superstar. And now you go into this series knowing you've beaten the New York Knicks twice on their home floor and you've won the entire season series. I think the Pistons have to feel very confident about themselves. The Knicks know that they have to advance to at least the second round and be competitive against the Celtics, who will surely get out of the first round. At least if New York bows out in the conference semifinals to the reigning NBA champions, it's not the worst look in the world. But if they lose to the Detroit Pistons, you're going to see drastic changes coming into this organization. And primarily, it's going to start with head coach Tom Thibodeau.
Yeah, we were all fairly high on the Pistons in our preseason preview here for OddsShark. But, John, talk to me a little bit about this Knicks uber thin rotation here. Tibbs has absolutely loved running this starting 5 into the floor. Bridges, Hart, OG, all top 10 in the league in minutes played this season. Do you foresee this as a bit of a problem here in this series for the Knicks? Just the fact that fatigue could be a factor?
Yeah, just to go back on Chris's point real quick, I was on an upstart Milwaukee Bucks team for going from the worst team in the NBA to the fun kind of how the Pistons are doing, right? 5th seed. We ended up playing the Celtics or something like that. We didn't do very well for a couple of years. We played the Raptors too, by the way, Chris. I don't remember that series. And the Raptors it was the first couple years are tough for the Pistons. They're going to be tough for the Pistons. They lack experience. They lack depth, to make a playoff run. So I actually love the Knicks in this series, but only because literally we were the Pistons. Like exact Giannis, becoming the superstar, Chris Middleton. We were young. It was a sexy team. Didn't work in the playoffs. But moving on, the Knicks thin rotation, I don't think that affects them now. Not yet. I think as the season goes on, or as the playoffs go on and they play more and more minutes, they can't afford to have a 6 or 7 game series, drag out series with the Pistons. I think that's the biggest threat to the Knicks. Having a couple long series, you're worn down, you're tired, and then all of a sudden you got Boston Celtics coming in off an 8-day break. They could get ran out of the gym. So it will affect them later into the playoffs if they give away games and start to kind of have to battle back. Say, if they get down 2-1 to the Pistons, imagine how much energy and mental energy and physical energy it's going to take just to, come back in that series, and then you got to go play next, right? An even better team. So I think if the Knicks give away games and they do not finish off teams how they should, they could burn out pretty quickly.
Guys, talk to me about this series and who or what could be an X factor in this series. And John, I'll start with you. We know Cade is going to get his. We know Brunson and Cat will be big time players, but who is sort of under the surface or under the radar that could be a big time player here in this series?
I'm going to go with a 3-point shooting. They're a pretty mediocre 3-point shooting team. They're 17th in the NBA at 3-point per shooting, 20th in makes per games. Malik Beasley is the only guy on their team shooting over 40%, besides Jaden Ivey, who was injured, and everybody is pretty much average to not good. I think that is the X factor of the series. The Knicks should probably go to pack it in, and hope make them shoot threes.
Yeah, I think my X factor is also on the Detroit Pistons. I think their biggest issue is that they need to distinguish who their number 2 option is going to be. We know Cade Cunningham is a superstar. He's going to be leading the charge as their playmaker and facilitator, but it's essentially a revolving door of who that number 2 guy is, whether it's Malik Beasley, Tobias Harris, Nasur Thompson, Dennis Schroeder, Tim Hardaway Jr., you name it. They need to determine who outside of Cunningham is going to get the rock in those tough situations. So I'm kind of leaning in the same direction that John is. I'm going with Malik Beasley as my X factor in this series. He's the 5th player to ever drain 300 plus 3-pointers in a single season. He converted 41.6% on 9.3 attempts, which is really absurd efficiency at such a high output. He was the team's 2nd leading scorer as well. So obviously they are expecting a little bit more offense from him as opposed to the Harrises and the Thompsons of the world. While the Knicks were a top 10 team in opponents' 3-pointers made and attempted as well, they actually ranked 26th in efficiency from 3-point range for the opposition. So that's really good news for someone like Beasley, who shoots it to his heart's content.
I want to talk about what you guys are betting for the series. But before we do that, what interests you guys in terms of, player props for this series? Maybe a player you've got your eye on and a particular market. And John, I'll start with you.
I was looking on BetMGM, it's like searching through the bushes to find these player props. It's like they don't want you to find them for the series. But I saw one as a whole that I think is pretty good for the playoffs. Jalen Brunson, to average over 22.5 points per game in the playoffs at -115 at BetMGM. That seems really low considering what he was doing last year. Maybe they think he's banged up. You're betting with him not being fully healthy. But if I can get pretty much an even bet for him to average over 22 points a game, I think that is a steal. And then, for the series, I found a Cade Cunningham to average over 25.9 points per game. That was also something that was intriguing. But Jalen Brunson over 22.5 for the playoffs, I think that's a steal value-wise. I think that's a big one. It's not for the series, but it's essentially you're getting a bet on him to have a pretty good playoff series, not a great one.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about what he was doing last year in those early games. Going off. Every game he was putting up insane numbers. What about you, Chris? Any sort of targets you're looking at for this series for player prop markets?
Yeah, on a game-to-game basis, I'm going to be looking at the numbers that Mikal Bridges produces. He had a ton of success against the Pistons during the regular season, averaged 19.6 points while shooting 56.6% from the field, 53.3% from 3-point range. He's not necessarily known as a 3-point shooter, but he did find success in that aspect against Detroit through those 4 games. Lest we forget that the Knicks gave up 5 first-round picks for this guy. So if anyone on the Knicks can't afford to have a bad series, it's probably him. I know when you're playing alongside 2 offensive-minded players like Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson, it's hard to imagine you averaging 20-plus points in a series. That's why I kind of steered away from what he could potentially average for the entire best of 7. I'm going to be looking at it from a game-to-game basis, but remember, Bridges was the guy who called out head coach Tom Thibodeau, both behind the scenes and to the media, and said, hey, we need to start getting rest for our starters to head into the playoffs, give some of our second unit guys a little bit more run. It gives us a little bit more wiggle room to recover and be ready for this long haul through the postseason. So I am anticipating Bridges to have a strong series here against Detroit. But again, I'm not going for the entire series. I like it on a game-to-game basis just because he does have that hot and cold nature, and I do want to see what Brunson and Towns produce offensively.
Let's finish it off here with what you guys are looking at for, series markets here. I mentioned the Knicks price at the top of this video. Very steep, very chalky here. But John, anything caught your eye here for this series here between the Knicks and the Pistons?
I'm going to go back to history, as I stated before, where Chris was talking about the, Pistons playing with house money. We played the Raptors in 2017. They were 3, we were 6. We lost 4-2. And then the next year, we were a 7 seed, and the Celtics were a 2 seed, and we took them to 7. So I'm going to go, this series goes over 5.5. I think that is a pretty solid bet. If you look at history, which I happen to have been a part of sitting there watching. So for the folks at home, I like the over 5.5 at minus 128 at the moment.
And Chris, how about you?
So while I do personally believe that the New York Knicks are going to win this series, and I am projecting it to go long, I am going to take the over on 5.5 games. From a betting perspective, earlier this morning at FanDuel Sportsbook, I bet on the Detroit Pistons to win this series at plus 980 value to win in either 6 or 7 games. Now, I took 6, if only because if it does go 7, I think the New York Knicks will have the advantage playing a game 7 at Madison Square Garden in front of that raucous New York crowd. Maybe a lot for an inexperienced team like the Pistons to overcome. And like I said earlier, my bold prediction was the Knicks to win the NBA championship. So I really don't want to bet against them not to get out of the first round. But again, there's so much terrific value right now just taking the Pistons. I think this is going to be like the unofficial coronation of Cade Cunningham moving into that next tier of superstardom. I think he is going to make the biggest impact in this series. And I do honestly foresee it going the distance, 6 or 7 games, although New York on paper should technically win. Again, going 1-3 against the Pistons during the regular season does leave a lot of room for doubt. And I think Detroit is going to shock many people and cost a lot of people a lot of money in this series.